Hello friends, welcome back. This video is titled Disease Mongering, and these are reflections on the current state of affairs. Who is a monger? A monger is a seller, like a fishmonger or an ironmonger. We shall be looking at a very sensitive subject today, and that is disease mongering by the medical establishment. At the outset, I would like to say that we must trust science, but we can't apply the same statement to scientists. Scientists are mortal men, and it is very well known that all mortal men have desires which are forever unmet. Science, on the contrary, is a body of knowledge, ever evolving. It is a way of thinking, and that is what we call as the scientific method. I would first like to begin with both a claimer and a disclaimer. The claimer first. I hereby claim that all information in this video is derived from reliable sources and are suitably referenced. This video is not my personal opinion. It is actually a collation of published literature. And now for the disclaimer. The views expressed by the authors who have been quoted, they should be viewed in the context of the original publications. All these publications are suitably referenced, and I invite you to explore, examine, weigh them, and then form your own opinion. One of the core and fundamental foundations of science is the fact that whatever is claimed by science should be reproducible. A result obtained by experiment should be achieved again and again with a high degree of agreement with the experiment that was replicated, provided the same methodology was used by the researchers who are testing the thesis. So we would expect, much as we expect in mathematics and physics, that in the medical field we should have a very high index of reproducibility. Is that really so? We shall just examine. Let us now see how far most medical research is replicable. This is a very famous and celebrated paper of John Ioannidis, who is a professor at Stanford University, and his work has been widely cited in more than 100,000 papers worldwide. What he says is that false findings may be the majority or even the vast majority of published research claims, and he's talking about medical research. Now that is a very serious observation. Further, he says that this should not be surprising. And why is that so? Because it can be proven that most claimed research findings are false. Time to think about it. So I'll stay here with this slide so that you can absorb what Dr. John Ioannidis of Stanford University has to say. And mind you, if you go through the research papers which I have quoted above, there is a lot of correspondence, but none has been able to refute his claim. Here is a quote from Marcia Angel, who had been the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the top 3 journals of medical science, and she says that it's simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. Further, she states that she takes no pleasure in this conclusion, which she reached slowly and reluctantly over the period that she was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. So that now brings us to the theme of this video, disease mongering. What exactly is it? Another word for the same act is medicalization. Medicalization is convincing healthy people that they are sick and that they require medicines. This is from Disease Mongering, an article that was published in the Singapore Medical Journal way back in 2007. Let us now see some examples of medicalization. This was published in the PLOS Medicine, and PLOS stands for Public Library of Science. This one does not receive funding from the pharmaceutical industry and is independent. Here are some examples of medicalization. Erectile dysfunction and the whole industry of Viagra that goes with it. Bipolar disorder. Psychologists are roped in to diagnose people with bipolar disorder, which really isn't requiring any medicalization. Similarly, it has been found that teachers in schools have been given special training, and in fact they are taught how to fill out forms so that children could be categorized as having ADD or ADHD. Osteoporosis and its genetic foundation is yet another example of medicalization. It could be something as minor as a restless leg syndrome and much more. So I would invite you to explore this 47-page document at the link given here. Let us now discuss the tactics of disease mongering or medicalization. The first step is to take a normal function and imply that there is something wrong with it and that it requires to be treated. Try to define as large a proportion of the population as possible to be suffering from that so-called disease or condition. Once that is done, then use a wrong or a vague endpoint. And what exactly do we mean by an endpoint? It means that there is no clear defined outcome of the treatment that is being promoted through medicalization. Some more smart tricks or tactics used for medicalization or disease mongering are to take a common symptom and make it sound as if it is a sign of a very serious disease, so that you are not only doing disease mongering but also fear mongering. Next, another tactic is to promote technology as a risk-free magic. Impress people with technology as if something that was not possible in the past is now possible simply because of the advances of science. Yet another tactic is the selective use of statistics to exaggerate the benefits of the treatment. Nobody goes for the original publications. People just go by word of mouth publicity, which has been promoted by the manufacturers of that particular treatment or drug intervention. Here is what the British House of Commons Health Committee had to report when they reported on the influence of pharmaceutical industry. They found that out of the top 500 companies in the world, 10 pharmaceutical companies had profits which outweighed the combined profits of all the other 490 companies. That is now quite a remarkable observation, and that goes to show the outreach they have with the muscular power of finances. Out of the power that they derive from their financial strength, the drug industry in fact controls everything. Their staff writes so-called research papers by research funded by these companies. A lot of negative findings never get published. Also, there is concealment of mortality risks. That means the risk of dying is underplayed. And anything that is negative is, through the art of a wordsmith, made to appear positive. As to how exactly the drug industry influences the whole medical establishment, here are a few examples. There are tremendous inducements to doctors. As a matter of fact, 96% of the anonymous survey of doctors revealed that they were induced with being lavished with good food, invitations to conferences and symposia, travel expenses paid, and more than 50% received personal gifts just to influence them to do what the drug industry wanted them to do. Yet another new tactic is prescribing for off-label use. That means in addition to using a drug for the certified use on the label, they are tutored that they can be used for some off-label use which is not exactly in consonance with the publications. Yet another tactic is that once the drug has reached its maturity of the patent regime and that it faces to be marketed as an open source or a generic drug, what these drug industries do is they repackage isomers or similar molecules and market them as new drugs. And then it again goes through a new cycle of inducement to doctors, publication in journals, and of course, allowing off-label use for the new drug. All of us are very familiar with these big names. The New England Journal of Medicine, which we see here, has been in publications since 1812. The British Medical Journal, helping doctors make better decisions. And of course, the revered Journal of the American Medical Association. How does the drug industry influence the journal editors, the people who are responsible for getting the peer review done and to get them published? The success of these journals is assured financially by lavishing a purchase order of a large number of reprints well in advance. These journals are very expensive. In fact, each individual article can normally cost anywhere between 35 to 75 US dollars. So if the industry guarantees purchasing a tremendously large number of reprints in advance, naturally, the editors are going to be influenced. Here is what a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine has to say. And I quote, "This industry uses its wealth and power to co-opt every institution that might stand in its way. And that includes the US Congress, the FDA, the academic medical centers, and the medical profession itself." You'll find this quote from the book, The Truth About Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It, published by Random House Publications. Here is another quote from the same book which I mentioned earlier. "In many drug-intensive medical specialties, it is virtually impossible to find an expert who is not receiving payments from one or more drug companies." And this is from Richard Horton, who was the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, the renowned British journal. And he says that journals have devolved into information laundering operations for the pharmaceutical industry. And that is where this quotation appears from, the dawn of Mac Science. Richard Smith had been the editor-in-chief of the British Medical Journal for 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. And what he confesses is that it took me almost a quarter of a century editing for the BMJ to wake up to what was happening. Medical journals are an extension of the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. And here is the reference to this quotation. Richard Smith continues further and he says, "How did we reach a point where so many doctors won't attend an educational meeting unless it's accompanied by free food and a bag of goodies? Something's wrong, and medical journals are part of what is wrong." A very, very serious charge indeed. Once again, from the same reference published by PLOS. One point we must note is that patients are to blame also. It is not only drug companies who are to blame, but also the physicians who diagnose a disorder and prescribe a drug, as well as the patients who feel that they have a serious disease that needs treatment. So it's a joint effort of the drug company, the physician, as well as the patient who is insisting on a treatment for a perceived threat or disease. We must keep that in mind. The reference to this particular finding is shown here on the slide on top. Let me now summarize of what we covered in this video. We first mentioned that we must trust the science, but not the scientist. The scientist is a mortal, and a mortal has desires, and unfulfilled desires control behavior, and therefore the so-called scientific output of that person. Next thing we noticed was reproducibility is very poor, especially when it comes to medical experiments that are published in famous journals. This was from a Stanford professor of repute, John Ioannidis. Then we talked about the concept of medicalization or disease mongering, which now can also be equated with fear mongering of the general population, so that they are induced to seek treatment or medication. We also saw the tremendous influence that drug industry has on the entire medical establishment, not only on the journals and publications, but also on the individual medical practitioner who is literally bribed or incentivized with rewards. Their influence extends all the way up to regulatory bodies and the government itself. So that brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you for staying with me, and we shall meet once again on another topic of interest to all of us.